Welcome back to the deep dive.
It's great to be back.
Today, we're going to be diving deep into the world of endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs. You've been doing a great job tracking what you eat and the products that you use.
Absolutely.
And this deep dive into the Endocrine Society's scientific statement on EDCs will help you understand how those choices might be impacting your health.
Yeah, these are EDCs are these sneaky chemicals that can mimic or block your hormones and kind of throw off your body's carefully calibrated systems.
And the thing is you're exposed to them everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They're lurking in everyday products like plastics, pesticides, even things like flame retardants. We're going to unpack all of that. Specific EDCs, how they work in your body, and their impact on everything from your metabolism to your reproductive system.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know about you, but I'm ready to be surprised.
What's fascinating about this one is that it's not just about how much of an EDC you're exposed to, but when early life, we're talking fetal development.
Got it.
And infancy seems to be a particularly vulnerable time.
So something I was exposed to as a baby could still be affecting me today.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, think about it. During those early stages, your hormones are directing this incredibly intricate symphony of development.
Yeah.
EDCs can disrupt that delicate process with potentially lifelong consequences.
Wow. Okay. Let's get specific. One of the EDCs that you encounter frequently is bisphenol A, or BPA.
Yes, very common.
You mentioned canned tomatoes in your food log.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that lining often contains BPA, which can leach into your food.
Exactly. And you regularly use plastic water bottles. BPA is used to make certain plastics, so that's another potential source of exposure you've identified. What's concerning is that BPA acts like estrogen in the body. It can actually bind to your estrogen receptors, interfering with your natural hormonal signal.
So it's like BPA is cutting in on estrogen's dance floor, stepping on its toes and messing up the whole routine.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay.
And the research shows that prenatal BPA exposure has been linked to issues like prostate development in males.
Okay, so BPA is definitely one to watch out for.
Definitely.
What other EDCs should we be aware of?
Well, PCBs and PBDEs are two others that have been on our radar for a while. These were widely used in industrial applications. Think flame retardants and things like that.
I actually remember my parents talking about PCBs when I was a kid.
Oh, wow.
I thought we got rid of those ages ago.
Some of them were banned.
Okay.
But the problem is they're incredibly persistent in the environment and can accumulate in our bodies over time. In fact, North Americans tend to have higher levels of PBDEs in their blood compared to other populations.
So even though they're not used as much anymore, they're still hanging around and we're still absorbing them?
Still out there.
That seems like a tough cycle to break.
It is. And these chemicals have been linked to a whole host of issues. For example, PCBs have been shown to disrupt thyroid function, mimic estrogen, and even block the effects of androgens like testosterone.
So they're like hormonal multitaskers, but in a bad way.
Yeah.
Messing with multiple systems at once. This raises the question, how are they actually doing all of this? What's the mechanism?
Yeah, so there are a few ways. One is through hormone receptor binding.
Okay.
EDCs can bind to the same receptors that our natural hormones use, either mimicking their effects or blocking them.
Got it.
We talked about BPA binding to estrogen receptors. That's a prime example.
And we know how important those receptors are for keeping everything running smoothly.
Absolutely.
If an EDC is taking up space on the receptor, our natural hormones can't do their job.
Exactly. Another way that EDCs work is through something called epigenetic modifications. Think of your genes like a cookbook, and epigenetics are the notes scribbled in the margins. They tell your body which recipes to make and how to make them. EDCs can change those notes.
So they're not changing our DNA itself, but they're changing how our DNA is expressed.
That's right.
Okay, that's pretty powerful.
It is. And the scary part is that these epigenetic changes can be long-lasting and even passed down to future generations. We're talking about your children and even your grandchildren potentially being affected by your exposure to EDCs.
That's definitely something to think about. And it makes this whole early life exposure thing even more critical, right?
Absolutely. Early life exposure is particularly impactful because it can permanently alter the epigenome, which can then increase susceptibility to diseases later in life.
You mentioned research on BPA and vinclozolin.
Right.
What have they found?
Well, Studies in rodents have shown that exposure to these chemicals can lead to problems with prostate and reproductive health, even in generations that weren't directly exposed.
Wow.
It raises a lot of questions about the potential implications for humans.
That's alarming. But before we jump to conclusions,
Yeah.
what about the dose? We hear a lot about safe levels of chemicals.
Right.
Does that apply to EDCs?
That's where things get tricky. Unlike many other chemicals,
Okay.
EDCs don't always follow the typical dose-response patterns. Sometimes even low doses can have significant effects.
So the idea that the dose makes the poison
Yeah.
doesn't always hold up with EDCs.
Not necessarily. It's because they're interacting with our very intricate endocrine system,
Right.
where tiny amounts of hormones can have huge effects.
Yeah.
Defining a safe threshold for EDCs can be incredibly difficult.
Okay, so we've established that EDCs are everywhere, they're messing with our hormones in complex ways, and even low doses can be problematic.
Yes.
But let's get to the heart of it. What are the specific health concerns
Oh, yeah.
we're talking about?
One major area of concern is obesity and diabetes. There's a growing body of evidence supporting the odesogen hypothesis, which suggests that exposure to certain EDCs can actually program our bodies to store more fat, making weight management harder.
That's fascinating. You mean exposure to these chemicals could actually be contributing to the obesity epidemic?
That's what some researchers believe.
Oh, wow.
Studies have linked EDCs like BPA, phthalates, and POPs to obesity and diabetes in both animals and humans.
Got it.
And they think it might be happening through a few different mechanisms. Some EDCs can promote the formation of fat cells. Others can disrupt energy balance,
Okay.
making it harder to burn calories. And some might even affect insulin sensitivity, which is key for regulating blood sugar levels. It's a complex issue with lots of ongoing research.
So it's not just about willpower and making healthy choices.
Right.
These EDCs could be stacking the deck against us from the start.
Yeah.
And we're just scratching the surface here.
Yes.
There's so much more to uncover about the specific effects of these chemicals on different parts of the body.
Exactly. We've talked a lot about BPA's potential effects on men, but in our next segment, we'll dive deeper into how EDCs can impact female reproductive health, which is especially relevant to you given your goals.
That's definitely something I want to know more about. I'm ready to keep diving deeper into this.
Welcome back to our deep dive into EDCs.
Last time we explored how EDCs can affect us during critical developmental stages.
Right.
It's unsettling to think that something you were exposed to as a child could still be impacting your health today.
And it underscores just how complex these chemicals are and how much we still have to learn.
We talked about how BPA can affect men, but now I'm really curious to learn more about the impact of EDCs on female reproductive health. You mentioned that this is particularly relevant to me, so I'm all ears.
It is. Especially since you're thinking about starting a family. The female reproductive system is incredibly sensitive to hormonal shifts, and EDCs can disrupt that delicate balance at many points, from ovarian function to uterine health.
Wow, so we're talking about a pretty wide range of potential impacts.
Yeah.
What are some of the specific concerns?
Well, you mentioned in your notes that you've been experiencing irregular periods.
Right.
EDCs, like phthalates, which are commonly found in plastics and personal care products, can actually mimic estrogen, confusing your body's natural signaling during ovulation.
Yeah.
That hormonal disruption can lead to irregular cycles.
Phthalates are in so many things, lotions, shampoos, even food packaging. It's almost impossible to avoid them completely.
It can be challenging, but knowing where they lurk can help you make more informed choices.
Okay, so phthalates might be contributing to my irregular cycles. What other ways can EDCs impact female reproductive health?
They can impact fertility by affecting the ovaries, those incredible organs responsible for producing eggs and hormones like estrogen and progesterone.
Right, the masterminds of the menstrual cycle.
Exactly, and EDCs can interfere with this process in a number of ways. Some, like the pesticide MXC, can actually damage the developing ovaries, potentially leading to fewer eggs.
That's pretty scary, especially for someone like me who wants to have children.
It is a valid concern, and it's not just about the quantity of eggs. EDCs can also affect their quality, potentially making it harder to conceive or increasing the risk of birth defects.
So these chemicals are attacking the very foundation of the reproductive system. Are there any other EDCs that affect the ovaries?
Yes. TCDD is another one that has been shown to disrupt a process called follicle formation, which is essential for normal ovarian development.
Okay, so we've got phthalates, MXC, and TCDD all potentially impacting the ovaries. It feels like there are EDCs everywhere you turn. Is there any good news here?
Well, awareness is key. The more we understand about these chemicals, the better equipped we are to make choices that minimize our exposure. And research is ongoing more. Scientists are constantly learning more about the complex ways EDCs interact with our bodies.
That's encouraging, but I also want to know what I can do now to protect myself.
There are definitely steps you can take. We can talk more about those later. But for now, let's keep exploring the different ways EDCs can affect female reproductive health. We've talked about the ovaries. But EDCs can also impact the uterus and vagina.
I'm all for learning more, but this is getting a little unsettling. What kind of impacts are we talking about?
EDCs have been linked to structural abnormalities in the uterus and even an increased risk of uterine cancer.
Wow, okay. This is definitely information I need to know.
And it's important to remember that we're still learning about the long-term consequences of EDC exposure. There's a lot we don't know, especially when it comes to human reproductive outcomes.
I imagine it's hard to study the long-term effects.
It is, and we also have to consider that many potential EDCs haven't even been studied in detail yet.
That's a daunting thought. It feels like we're just starting to understand the tip of the iceberg.
In a way, yes. But even with the limited knowledge we have now, we can start making changes to protect ourselves.
That's a good point. Okay, so we've talked about the ovaries, the uterus, and the vagina. What about hormones themselves? Do EDCs directly affect hormone production?
They absolutely can, and this is especially relevant to you given your irregular periods.
Yeah.
One process that's often disrupted is steroidogenesis. That's the process of making hormones like estrogen and progesterone.
Right, those are essential for regulating the menstrual cycle. So if EDCs mess with steroidogenesis, it could definitely explain why my cycles are off.
Exactly, and we already talked about phthalates, but pesticides can also interfere with steroidogenesis.
It seems like these EDCs have a lot of different ways to disrupt the endocrine system.
They do, and the effects can be very specific. For instance, research has shown that exposure to certain pesticides can interfere with the production of progesterone, which is vital for maintaining a pregnancy.
So EDCs could even be contributing to miscarriages and other pregnancy complications.
It's a possibility that researchers are actively investigating, and it underscores the importance of minimizing exposure, especially during pregnancy.
This is a lot to take in. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all the potential risks.
It's understandable to feel that way, but knowledge is power. The more we understand about these chemicals, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
I agree. It's definitely motivating me to do more research and be more careful about the products I use. But before I spiral, are there any other major areas we need to cover in terms of female reproductive health? So we've been deep diving into the world of EDCs and their potential effects on female reproductive health. It's pretty sobering stuff. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to learn more about how these chemicals affect men.
That's an important area to cover, especially since you mentioned in your notes that your partner is concerned about declining sperm counts.
Yeah, it seems like it's becoming more and more common these days.
It's true. And research suggests that EDCs might be playing a role, just like with the female reproductive system. The male reproductive system is incredibly sensitive to hormonal disruption.
Right. We've talked about how hormones orchestrate so many vital processes in the body. It makes sense that if those hormones are thrown off balance, it could have ripple effects throughout the system.
Exactly. And EDCs can interfere with male reproductive health at various stages, from fetal development all the way to adulthood.
We touched on this earlier when we talked about BPA potentially affecting prostate development in males. But what are some of the other concerns?
One of the most concerning concepts in this field is something called testicular dysgenesis syndrome, or TDS. For short, it refers to a cluster of male reproductive health issues that are thought to be linked to EDC exposure during fetal development.
TDS, that sounds serious. What kind of issues are we talking about?
TDS encompasses a range of problems, including things like cryptorchidism, hypospadias, low sperm count, and even testicular cancer.
So exposure to EDCs in the womb could increase a man's risk of developing these conditions later in life. That's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is, and what's particularly alarming is that the incidence of these conditions has been rising in recent decades, coinciding with the increased production and use of many EDCs.
It's like we're seeing a real-world example of how early life exposures can have long-term consequences. It makes you wonder what the future holds if we don't get a handle on this EDC problem.
It's a valid concern, and it highlights the need for more research to understand how EDCs are contributing to these trends and to develop strategies for prevention and intervention.
Let's unpack some of these TDS conditions a bit more. We talked about cryptorchidism earlier. That's when the testicles don't descend properly into the scrotum. But what is hypospadias?
Hypospadias is a birth defect where the opening of the urethra is not located at the tip of the penis. It's a condition that often requires surgical correction, and it can have psychological impacts as well.
It sounds like both cryptorchidism and hypospadias can significantly impact a man's life.
They certainly can, and the research suggests that both conditions are more common in boys who were exposed to certain EDCs during fetal development.
You mentioned that animal studies have shown a link between anti-androgens in these conditions. Can you explain what anti-androgens are?
Anti-androgens are essentially chemicals that block the effects of testosterone, and there are a number of EDCs that have anti-androgenic properties, including certain pesticides and phthalates, which we've talked about quite a bit already.
So if a developing fetus is exposed to these anti-androgenic EDCs, it could interfere with the normal masculinization process that happens in the womb.
That's the thinking. And while the effects might be subtle, they can still have significant consequences for reproductive health later in life.
Let's talk more about sperm specifically. You mentioned your partner is concerned about declining sperm counts. How do EDCs affect sperm production and quality?
Sperm production is a complex process that relies heavily on hormones, particularly testosterone. And EDCs can disrupt this process at multiple points, leading to problems with sperm count motility, how well they swim, and even morphology, which refers to their shape.
So we're talking about fewer sperm, sperm that don't swim as well, and sperm that might not be the right shape to fertilize an egg. All of that could make it much harder to conceive.
Exactly. And there is research linking EDC exposure to these issues in humans. Studies have shown that men with higher levels of certain EDCs in their bodies tend to have poorer sperm quality.
It's a little frightening to think that something as common as exposure to certain plastics or pesticides could be impacting a man's fertility.
It is a serious concern, and it underscores the importance of minimizing our exposure to these chemicals, not just for our own health, but for the health of future generations.
Okay, so we've covered TDS sperm quality, and earlier we talked about BPA potentially affecting prostate development. Are there any other ways EDCs might impact the prostate?
Yes. Beyond BPA, there is evidence suggesting that exposure to other EDCs like pesticides and heavy metals could increase the risk of prostate cancer.
Prostate cancer is such a common cancer among men. It's concerning to think that EDCs might be contributing to the problem.
It's an area of active research. The challenge is that prostate cancer often develops slowly, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact causes. But the potential link between EDCs and prostate cancer is certainly worth investigating further.
It seems like every time we uncover one piece of the EDC puzzle, it just reveals more complexity and more questions. So where do we go from here as individuals and as a society?
Yeah.
How do we address this EDC problem?
Well, awareness is a critical first step. The more people understand the potential risks of EDCs, the more likely they are to make informed choices about the products they use and the environments they expose themselves to.
Right. It's about reading labels, researching the chemicals in our everyday products, and considering safer alternatives whenever possible.
Exactly. And beyond individual actions, we need systemic changes. Stronger regulations on the production and use of EDCs are crucial. We also need more research to identify and assess the risks of these chemicals and to develop safer alternatives. It's not just about banning certain chemicals, but about finding better solutions that don't compromise our health or the health of the planet.
It sounds like it's going to take a multifaceted approach to tackle this problem. Personal responsibility, scientific research, and policy changes all working together.
I agree, it's a complex issue, but it's one we can't afford to ignore.
Well, this has been an incredibly informative, albeit slightly alarming, deep dive into the world of endocrine-disrupting chemicals.
We've learned about the potential impacts of EDCs on both male and female reproductive health. We've explored the concerning link to conditions like TDS, the effects on sperm quality and prostate health, and the importance of early life exposures.
It's clear that EDCs are a serious threat to our health and the health of future generations. But by understanding the risks, minimizing our exposure, and advocating for change, we can work towards a healthier future for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you found it valuable and that you'll continue to explore this important topic. Until next time, stay curious and stay well.